Oh, it's so good to see you.
Yeah, this is like homecoming.
The first question I like to start with is there anything from this current experience that you're learning about yourself?
Sure, that's a great question. Actually, one of the things I'm learning about myself, I've known all along, I guess, but it's just a reaffirmation, and that is never give up. I think what this whole thing represents is kind of like rebirth,
Hmm.
and it's not something I ever expected. And the young people in your audience and other audiences always say, "Well, are they going to bring it back?" And we're going to bring word back, and there'll be a program. And I always say, "No, it won't happen." And here, SpaceX has opened the door
Hmm.
so that that's possible. Now, for me, it's just a reaffirmation that timeless design does work, and a lot of fans that the younger crowd at NASA, when we introduced this thing, they've all grown up and they're flight directors now and everything. So we have a big base there, and it includes the people at SpaceX and the director of NASA. So I think what I've learned about myself is, and it was true through this recent illness, is just you just got to keep going straight ahead,
Yeah.
and never lose faith, because good things happen, and a positive attitude is just the best.
Yeah.
It's the only way to go, and
Yeah.
this is an affirmation really of that.
I liked how the timing seemed to be perfect for your birthday, which was recent too.
Well, that's extraordinary. So now that's the frosting on the cake.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, because my birthday is when they announced that they're putting the logo back in space, and that was my 86th birthday. So it's just absolutely stunning.
Mhm.
I'm still pinching myself. Uh, there was no planning involved. Some friend said, "So you set that up?" But the reality is, it just happened, and it was serendipity. Really great.
That's so cool. Cool. I'll start with some of the questions that have been rolling in.
Sure.
So Kayleigh says, James C. Fletcher, administrator of NASA at the time of the release of the NASA Graphic Standards Manual, prefaced the manual with a message that spoke toward a shared responsibility of maintaining standards of excellence. Can you talk about your relationship with him, where this message came from, and how it impacted design at NASA?
I think I read it recently, because we're really talking about Gary Pope's manual. It's a long, long time. And at the time, his letter going into the manual came kind of late in the game. So I don't really know if he wrote it or not. I certainly didn't have a personal relationship with him. He was tremendously supportive for the years that he was there. And I was the design consultant, or design director, for external, I should say, for 10 years. But I never really met him, although I worked very closely with the whole staff. I
Mhm.
thought the letter was superb. It even if somebody helped him write it, it was perfect. And one of the reasons I say perfect is because NASA was still very disjointed. They had the 11 centers who were very competitive, and he was stressing the fact that everybody had to pull together, and that we had a first class program now, and that they should be proud of it. Every person should be proud of it. So I thought it was a model letter. We probably gave him some ideas as to what to put in the letter. I think I remember that. But the reality is, they have to write it, and they have to believe it too. And the proof is really in the pudding, that down the line in the years that followed, he never wavered. And that's so important to the design team, because, really, at best, it's a very fragile situation. And in government, it's even more so. It's, every 4 years is an election. So everybody the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater often. And in this case, he was very supportive, and I was quite proud of him, actually, because it was, as I say, a perfect letter.
Mhm. Wow. And Kayla has a couple follow-up questions as well. So happy the worm logo has finally reinstated. First question is, how did this make you feel? You kind of went a little.
For sure, yeah. No, I was stunned. I think in a word, thrilled. You know, it's a long time coming. Programmers rescinded for almost no reason in 1992, so it was gone for 28 years. That's one of the reasons that I would not expect it to come back. Not that I didn't think the program, the Danny and Blackburn program was superb, I think. I still do. When you've seen the results and sales of the reissue of the manual from Jesse and Hamish, it's absolutely stunning. And we're in our 5th printing now, so you know, it's evidence that this thing really worked. But you know, then for me personally, it's just like flying again. You always had the sensation that you were part of the launch, and you know, that never went away. Even in the years when our program was scuttled, I never lost interest in NASA. I kept the faith, and I'm a big supporter. And you know, so it's a very joyful thing. And so when it comes back like this, it's just absolutely thrilling. There's no question about it.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, Jesse's mom is on the call.
Oh yeah, sure. Great.
Yeah. For those that don't know, Jesse is part of the team behind Standards Manual that did the Kickstarter reprint of the NASA Graphics Standards Manual.
Yeah. By the way, Jesse's mom was just great. So let's say hi to her too. Yeah.
So Calix's third question is, according to Wikipedia's source of the logo type, its color hex code DB362D in 1975, how did people know what the NASA red should be?
You mean how would they be able to match it?
Yeah.
The NASA red. I think you may know that the Pantone would not allow you to use their numbers in those days. I think that's changed now, but at that time you couldn't specify their number. So it was kind of ridiculous. So we actually, like the repro art for every center, we prepared color swatches, individual swatches, which were perforated, and you take them out. Match colors on enamel and on offset paper, and they were perfect matches to 179. We called it NASA Red, and that is stuck, which why not own it, right? Yeah. So that's what we did, and they matched that until such a time as we could actually, behind the scenes, we let people know what the color spec was, and that had been a rather controversial color, but it turned out to be great. And even now, as we're applying it to rockets and things where you actually have both, the meatballs still there.
Yeah.
So you get red, white, and blue kind of a scheme now, which it seems to be pleasing even NASA, you know, which I think is great. I mean, this is all out in the open now. You know, it's quite wonderful that we're cooperating. And as I say, I'm still just a little bit surprised, to say the least, that we're trying to determine how far the program can be adapted again in concert with the meatball, since that will be the lead mark still. But there are a lot of good things could come of it beyond the DM2, which is happening next Wednesday, the launch. So it's being applied to that in kind of a wonderful way. And I can't thank SpaceX enough for opening this window and door. But there'll probably be other things, but we're working on it now, and it's a joy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is.
So Sean asks, when it comes to the NASA design system, being one of the first or the first, how did you approach creating that first system, and how did you establish your requirements?
I do a little flashback, Jina, here, and I was so pleased to work here. You know, closing speech at your first Clarity conference in 2017. And I remember asking you, why would you want me to do that? And you said, well, because you developed some of the very first style manuals. And it is true, and especially in government. But we had experience doing it in the corporate realm already. And I had done a couple of nice things, and Bruce certainly had plenty of experience at Marvin Guys working on programs like this. So we were, in a sense, for that time, we were becoming veterans already at a very young age. Mm-hmm. But the difference was that there was no real standard other than the NEA, National Endowment, who was behind this whole Federal Graphics Improvement Program. They wanted us to come as close as we could to that corporate world, and we're just top flight, just everything as good as it could possibly be. And of course, this was a little easier for NASA because they were sexy and it's exciting.
Yeah.
They wanted a quick victory, which is what we gave them. And I think the content for it, we really labored over it because, as I say, there was no real yardstick in the institutional world at that level. As I think you know, a lot of other people do not know, after we did NASA, we followed it up with some heroics, what I call monumentals, with the Department of Transportation, which manual was maybe 3 times as big as the NASA manual. And then FAA, and then the Corps of Engineers. So we got to be really good at it. Because we had victories, especially the NASA got so much attention. Then I guess we had an edge in the competitions, because every one of this, they were all competitions. And each one got bigger and bigger. And I think the last one were about 40 firms. 40 firms were competing on it. And we got it even though I didn't even want it. But well, it was, it was the 4th one, and it was, I thought, one too many. But it worked out great, and I have no qualms about that. But I was happy to go back to our corporate work and nonprofit work, which is very important to me.
Yeah. So Adrienne, what do you think of the entire genre of typefaces that are either directly or indirectly inspired by the logo? In other words, nationalization.
Mm-hmm. I think the references to things that inspired fonts and things. Is that the essence of the question?
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of, and you actually touched on this in your talk, but there's been a lot of inspiration from the NASA worm logo and typefaces and letter type logos.
Yeah, I'm working on a new book now, but I call this section the Copycat, graphics, and there are thousands of them. They're just, people send them to me all the time. So there are, in fact, I guess I just got a note from someone in the Netherlands who wanted to do a new font based on it. And I said, well, it's your business. If you want, I know that there's already 3 fonts out there that are so similar to one another. I said, it's going to be redundant, but be my guest. I'm not really in favor of fonts based on this. What made the logo nice is I think it was just enough of the special quality. But when you take it through a whole font, you're forcing it on certain letters, and it's just not that comfortable. And yet they keep doing it. So NASA itself has ripped it off 3 or 4 times. No, I mean, and for the outside world, I always say it's flattering, but not advisable.
Yeah.
I've got this section of imagery, which sometimes they're fonts like, the blockbuster film, The Martian. They did the Ares 3 font. And maybe in that amount, it wasn't too much fried chicken, you know what I mean? It kind of worked okay. Mm-hmm. But when they keep extending and on and on and on, I think Ames was the one, well, Jesse or Ames, they're interchangeable here, but they said, but they never get it right. And that sounds harsh, but it's meant in a kindly way. It's impossible to extend it and expect it to be really good, and that's why we didn't make other letters out of it.
Mm-hmm.
We used typefaces we thought were complementary to it, that could live well with it, but not steal from the character of the simple little four-letter logo.
And if I recall correctly, something you mentioned in your presentation at Clarity was that, you know, there was no vector graphics program to use to do this. Like, you did that by hand, right?
Yeah. everything in the whole program. And that was true for all the other ones I just mentioned, these monstrous programs. It was all analog and hand lettered. And so not only the logo type, but all the drawings of planes and shuttles and rockets and everything, you know, all done, you know, pen and ink. So that was like another century, literally, in every respect. And you know, today so much of it would be easy. I like to say that if Marlo Goodson, who was doing a lot of these drawings, if he'd made a mistake on the very corner of the last piece, then you get to start again. You know, today with the computer, it's just automatic in many respects. However, I love that part of it too. Mm-hmm. It's hand wrought. Here we are working for the space agency, and it's all about innovation and you know, the future and exploration, and yet it's being handcrafted. So yeah. I remember, I mean, some of the comments from that Clarity session that were happening during the talk, I still hear from these people. But, you know, what they were saying was it's so beautiful for 1974, 75, mm-hmm. and it holds up today. And that's, of course, the essence of what I try to do on everything. But I do think because it's analog, applied to the most progressive of all subjects in a way, it kind of enhances it rather than holds it back. And now it's all been vectored by other people, you know. I didn't even have a vector version of the logo. They started sending them to me, so now I have them. But you know, it just takes a while. And of course, we're totally computerized now. But you know, I just think about that in a way. It's like more valuable in so many respects. A lot of people that own the original manuals really revere that part of it. You know,
yeah,
that it's done. It's sort of like a violin or something.
Yeah, and it's funny because there are modern digital designers that like to throw handcrafted around when they talk about the work. I'm like, oh no, you don't know handcrafted.
Oh, it's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I think the reward is there, as I say. The payoff is there, and it makes it just a little bit richer, knowing that, because now in our sleep we can do some of this stuff, but it still isn't handcrafted. No,
right.
And you can usually tell. Sometimes a little bit of imperfection is nice, you know, so humanizes it, yeah.
I'd like to ask one more thing before I jump back to the questions. So what tools are you using now then? Like you said, you're still practicing design, so what are your staples?
Well, it's very straightforward. I mean, I'm still working in Quark Express, which is more complicated than in many respects. However, I still believe it's got a professional edge to it. A lot of people don't want to bother with it because it's kind of complex. But if I made the leap years ago, and so that's the kind of basic structure, and then of course a lot of Photoshop and Illustrator, the later versions. It gets to the point, as you probably would agree, it's hard to keep up with. And I don't have the same needs that I used to have, so we're geared back. Don't get depression. I'm working 24 hours a day here. Life is good, but those are the mainstays, and you know, we've gone through different type font management systems, and kind of resorted back to the simplest of all. But that's what we do. And if I have a problem, is I spend too much time on my big screen iMac, you know. because of certain health issues, I need to be moving around more all the time. You know,
Yeah.
but it's still good. It's a major. It allows, my wife and I are the firm now, basically, and we joke about it. But in our most productive years, we could do the work of 10 or 12 people back in New York, and those are the tools. You know, I mean, it just allows you, and even from Napa or Cape Cod, where we worked for 10 years, it's not possible, right? The Boonies. We were still working around the world. I did a major project in the Middle East and in Europe and Canada and Mexico. You know, in other words, we were all equal now because of cyberspace. So a lot of my friends quit when this whole computer thing, the electronic revolution, and we just kept going straight ahead. It paid off because it's able, even if I'm working for a non-for-profit, I mean, it could be across the country, you know. And, so that's pluses.
By the way, my very first style guide, I used Quark Express.
Express, yeah.
You know, everything's
well,
now.
it's you know, some of my friends actually, if they're doing logos and things, they just stay in Illustrator. They never get out of it. I mean, the ZPS world. But when you're in page layout, and I'm doing several kind of book projects now, and you've got to have something like that, even if the printer wants PDFs at the end. You know,
Right.
it's. I remember about 25 years attending a workshop where they said they will all be done. I said, no way, you know, but it turned out to be true.
So James asks, what made NASA and the team eventually choose Helvetica Light and Medium as the primary typeface?
Well, in our firm, which I like to relay in case anybody misses this, you know, we were 5 people when we did this program, and the joke was that included the receptionist. So 5 people, call it 4 in creative. That's really tiny. And so we worked on all aspects. We of course added people as we went, and we started to grow, and we eventually ended up being quite large. But the typefaces were decided fairly quickly, and one of the reasons for Helvetica Light was because Helvetica hadn't really, the tsunami hadn't hit yet. So we were kind of fairly early on. We needed something very complementary to the logo. And we went with light because it was more distinctive. And frankly, it had more aeronautic qualities. You know, in other words, by being lighter, it just seemed to fit. And it was more counterpoint against the logotype. Helvetica regular, even then, was being beaten up. You know, later it got so heavy, I stopped using it. Family entirely, you know. But so we had other typefaces that were recommended, Armand and Future, and people were puzzled by that, but we wanted to complement a family of fonts. But Helvetica Light, in terms of the nomenclature of the whole program, the centers, headquarters, and all that, was the dominant ancillary face. And it was so complementary, but it kept it kind of airy. And that seemed to really fit with the aeronautics idea, you know, it should not be too heavy. It's still in place. All of these things, they have kept them, even if they changed the meat all back, they kept the type, the relationships have kept the same. So that's still in place. Now we're looking at, say, about how to mix, if it's possible, to go ahead and extend the form back in. That's what's so delightful about it, is full circle. Not bad, huh?
Yeah.
Not bad. Somebody said, I guess it was in the Collins webinar, that it requires a lot of patience. And I said, yeah, patience. So in other words, here we have a program designed in 74, killed in 92, coming back to life, or a very useful life, in 2020.
That's incredible.
It's hard to even grasp, but it's hard to grasp it, get your head around it. But it's workable. We're kind of optimistic about the possibilities. And what's neat about it, Jina, is that NASA's a partner. I mean, they're really behind it. Everybody's keeping an open mind. One of the things that we haven't touched on that's so important is when they opened about 5 or 6 years ago, the apparel lineup. They started allowing name fashion designers to use the logo and stuff like that. I thought it was a little wacko, but nevertheless, stuff sold.
Yeah.
And then they started allowing it more in the casual realm. And it's so popular around the world now. International sales with just the logo sometimes, especially really young people. So now I get photographs literally from around the world, and they're kids. I mean, there's almost no explaining it, but it's a kick in the head. I mean, it's just. So I think that apparel realm has helped convince NASA that, geez, it's just not the manual reissue, or articles about it or podcasts. The apparel is sold very, very well, and it has, I like to say anyway, seems to have more legs today than it did back then.
Yeah, it's certainly
it's just, I don't know, I just stand back in kind of awe of that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you should thank Bruce Blackburn, and our firm was really hardworking, and we pulled that off, and here it is, still a major factor, So, and we have so much support there. I don't know, it's just joyful and heartwarming, and the fact that I particularly I never joined in on this stuff on the web, where people would be arguing, but never, not once commented. So what? Let it go. Can't win. And but now it's all out in the open, and it's much healthier. I think it's better for NASA.
Yeah.
It's good for SpaceX. They're real enthusiasts. I mean, Jesus, incredible people. And it's hard to be against an outfit like that. I mean, fingers crossed and all this stuff, right? But they deserve to have a lot of victories, I think.
Yeah, I was just thinking, they say fashion comes back, and NASA's that logo is like fashion now.
Well, it surprises me, the enthusiasm. Now it's revered in Europe and Asia, and for all those years before Zeshi and Ames republished the manual, I got stuff almost every other day, requests for both editorial background and visual backgrounds, and often it'd be graduate students or editors or from all over the world. That has settled down finally, because now they have access. They can buy the manual, and I mean, for $79 they can have it, own it, and that's quite. But it's just stunning how many people, if you're a person that needs reassuring, which I'm not, but the comments are unbelievable. They're so gratified now that it's come back. But the stuff that I would get then, it'd be voted top 10 in the world or something like that, and they'd say, what is wrong with these people? Why would anybody ever be stupid enough to jettison it? Well, it's language, and I never participated in that. It wasn't really something that I understood or could explain anyway. It just was crushing, frankly, at the time. And but the neat thing is that I think a right has been wronged. Sorry, the other way around. A wrong has been righted, and it's very encouraging. And the people, unsolicited stuff, as I stated, a lot of it's international. It's about time,
Yeah.
Thank goodness. So.
Yeah. Adrienne asked, will we ever see an extended standards manual with extra pages taking into account web design and social media, if only for us design geeks?
No. Hey, good point. I would think so. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, because this committee, which I think is an absolutely wonderful committee I'm working with, you know, of NASA people, several from JPL, which is my favorite center, but I mean, you know, very progressive. Our charge is to just try to see through all this and see what's possible. And of course, what was not even a gleam in the eye in those days, there was no web, there was no, and you realize that when you say everything was analog, you know, done by hand, but so is communication. You know, it's like horse and buggy days. There was no email. You couldn't do anything very fast except pick up a phone. So think about that. So the reality is now you have to look at these other mediums which didn't exist in those days. So there would be a supplement. There will be a supplement, I should say, to this whole thing, unless. I mean, I can't go too far and say this, but yes, it is being addressed, and I think that rightly so. So if this thing were to wend its way and have a natural conclusion, well, all that will be addressed, and certainly it wouldn't be an addendum to that specific graphic standards manual. I don't think it will be a standalone new thing, but that's one conclusion, which we assume will happen. But here again, there's a lot of political considerations, which you can imagine. Yes. And there are always budgetary considerations, and anything the federal government is just, especially these days, without getting deeply into that, it's just everything's loaded, and so you can get caught in that maelstream, you know. And I'm not going to. So it's fascinating, though, that it still happened. That the original man happened under Richard Nixon. So that alone is pretty stunning to think about. And so anything's possible. The answer to that question was yes, it will be considered now.
Awesome. Ames has a distinct blue and white color scheme. Were some of the 11 centers more difficult than others to work with?
Well, they were treated totally democratically, but the answer is yes, and I'm not going to name names. The difference is that some of them, first, they're very, very competitive, and I think that's a good thing. Nothing has changed in the 45 years since we were introduced to them. They all have to fight for the same dollars. They've got programs sometimes that overlap a little bit, you know, so that's part of it. They're also a little jealous sometimes, but I think it's all good. They're very talented, you know. I mean, so some of the centers have just naturally more glamorous roles, or let's say that appeal to the public more. JPL I just referred to. So what did they do? They work in deep space. That's pretty good. You know, in other words, if Hubble is out there, you know, or we're sending, a lot of the newer programs have to do with flying way past the moon. You know, you hear about Mars a lot. So a center might have a little bit of an edge. And the one thing that we all know and can appreciate is public gets involved when there's manned spaceflight. So when it was just robots and little surveyors and, you know, things crawling on the surface of another planet, it's clever and people like it, but it's never the same as like the shuttle program or Apollo or, you know, like that, because man, it's danger and the risk and the payoff. So you know, that's when everybody engages. That's why next week is a big week. I'm sending American astronauts back into space for the first time in decades, and it's exciting, and it really engages people. So I think that the centers, we work almost entirely, or tried with headquarters, but the centers did need particular attention from time to time. We did some workshops with specific centers that just didn't have a staff at all. I made the point that when we arrived there in '74, there wasn't a single designer on the staff of all the centers. You know, there were airbrush artists, and there were a couple of centers, the receptionists did the publications. So over time, we were able to, we hired an internal graphics coordinator, Bob Schulman, and then they started hiring on staff. So JPL had all along had a couple of designers, and now they have big design staff, which is quite superb. So the difficulties came, I think, from a lack of understanding. Sometimes a center felt left out. They didn't have quite the, you know, the horsepower in their program, or especially in publications. They just couldn't muster up the kind of same kind of horsepower. So it made it somewhat unequal, and we tried to address that. But basically, we were painting with a pretty broad brush, trying to help the whole agency pull itself up. That was the point of the program, as it was for all these other programs too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Alan says, thanks for speaking with us. I'm a USAF brat who grew up on Air Force bases around aerospace tech, and the NASA brand you built was an important part of my childhood. My question is around how design can connect citizens to government and by extension to each other. And what other areas of US government service do you think would benefit from a robust design system like the one you built?
I don't think I heard all of the question, but I would say this, that the NASA program was what we had hoped it would be, a quick and early victory. And so when we were invited to compete on the Department of Transportation, we came to that with a track record already. And I think that as you took this down the road into other programs, they didn't get easier, partly because they were even more complex. The Department of Transportation is everything. Airways, highways, railways, the Coast Guard was included. You know, it was amazing, and it was huge. So the impact you can have on that, it can't be just 1,000%. You know, I mean, you do the best you can. It's massive programs. I think that we racked up successes, and as I say, they kept hiring us for the next one, even though we're competing, because we had proven we could do it. It's really rough terrain. You know, it's just it's 10 times harder than in the corporate world. And I like to say we'd be really rich today if we'd done them for corporations. But it was important work that needed to be done. The thing that has been discouraging to me, like for instance, I did a big program down in Brazil not that long ago. Mendes Jr., big steel company, and it's just a beautiful program. And it included web and all this more current media. And I was pleased to go on to the website recently and see that after a decade or a decade and a half, that they had adhered to everything. It was gorgeous. It was just beautiful. You know, it hadn't broken down in any way. Conversely, I recently went and looked at some of the programs that we've done online, and I saw almost no evidence. The Department of Transportation, for instance. We've done some, I thought, were just great stuff in the publications area. Sure, the planes are painted, you know, like FAA, the planes are painted the same way they were, and they're very good looking. But almost everything else, you know, the decay had set in, and people were ignoring things. And I found that true. The one big exception, but it was not a glamorous area, the Army Corps of Engineers, because that's quasi-military. They did everything just bang, bang, bang. So, you know, 30 years later, 40 years later, it's exactly the same as it was. I mean, you can order signs out of the manual like you could 40 years ago. I mean, and they adhere to it. So, as I said, I don't think I heard all of the question, but I'm hoping that covers some of the ground.
Yeah, I think so. And we have a few more that I want to get through as well. James says, because government programs are always cost sensitive, was there any budget restraints or limitations when it came to color selection or printing technique when designing the mark?
Yeah, that's a great question. Budget kind of ruled in this realm. It was terribly important. Corporations don't want to waste money either, but they're much more liberal with their budgets, and they understand the value, I think, of the money expended and the results. And government, basically what they wanted was everything to be much better, but for what it used to cost. In some cases, we actually were able to pull that off. It was like a miracle, like the planes at FAA's cost less to paint, even though they're much better looking. They cost less to paint than the old designs. But in general, the budgets were extremely low. Now let's apply that back to the design firm. We were probably paid, with all this experience, I look back on it now, I said it was probably about 40% of what it was worth. So our contracts were, you know, you had constantly to do a new contract, even if it was just a tiny little program or, you know, a publication or a sign or something. You did a new contract. It wouldn't take you much time to write it up, and to do that, it was to do the work. So 40% is probably on the long side. So in other words, everything was a loss figure. Everything was. That's partly why I said earlier there was one program too many at the end, because I just felt that it was becoming a little bit repetitious, and you know, we weren't inventing the wheel anymore, and we were losing money.
Yeah.
We come racing back to our IBMs and Champion Internationals and Bristol Myers, you know, just to pay the bills. But I hold to one idea that I thought was important work at the time. I still believe that. I'm disappointed in the fact that they haven't been able to maintain like at the level they should. We may see a resurgence in that. One thing is never going to change. They're never going to have enough money like in the corporate world. You just won't. And that's why I think when Dan Goldman reversed our program, I was so stunned, because they had to repaint everything. They say, well, we'll do it, you know, as it comes out. But in reality, it costs a lot of money to change it back. And now good sense is prevailing, and you're going to get some of the best of both worlds, I think.
Yeah.
You have to stretch the money in a way that you don't have to for commerce. I think it's a system that, because of procurement, because of bureaucracy and everything, we will always be losing money. That's why you don't see anybody doing this work. Well, we climbed the mountain and we got it done. And, you know, I am proud of the performance. I am. And so you can't turn back anyway. I'm just a great career, you know, as you know that. Yeah. You know, I'm still able to do all the crafting and the beautiful stuff and through it all. So it's it worked.
Haley asks, do you have any advice for designers today who are working on design systems? And are there lessons learned along the way of building systems for some of the largest and most complex brands?
Well, on the encouraging side, I think this is where a lot of the action is, and you yourself have committed to this sort of way of life, and I agree with that. It's a really tough field now if you're just rolling around on the lower end. I particularly, my heart breaks for the new graduates. You know, through no fault of their own. I know some of them are building. We've done some lectures and things. There are no jobs, and they're going to come. The best student may not get employed. So put it back into context. The encouragement I would have for this realm is that it's the bigger picture, and it's always going to be the important realm, because everything trickles down out of that. Even stuff for the web or social media, you know, it all comes out of having a grand plan, and that's exemplified in the style manual and everything, which you're a major proponent of. So I think that's the best place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And out of that, you can move left, you can move right, you can go tangentially. But I do think that it's the best platform, or put it in the NASA mode, best launch pad. Even if for a couple of years, maybe you're subverting your own creative instincts a little bit. Maybe you're not inventing the wheel as the lowest person on the rung on the ladder. That kind of foundation pays off later, because you've been involved in some of the big stuff, and that's what the companies will still pay for, and even institutions, and then the other subdivisions or subsets of it, more ephemeral kind of work, whether that be web or publications, which hardly exist anymore. You'll have done it, and you still have the basic infrastructure, to do good work in these subsets. So I think that would be a good trajectory, something to shoot for as a young designer or graduate. I don't think that goes away. Thank you, Jina, for continuing to campaign for this. It made my career, even though I'm very concerned about smaller things, crafted things, beautiful things. But it's getting it in perspective, And if you're trying to make change, you're going to have to make it at that level. It's the world we live in now, and I think it's fine if if the projects still come, but it's just a changed world now. So I don't think the projects come certainly to an individual anymore. And when I started out, I could freelance. Somebody said today, "You mean you started freelancing in New York?" And the answer is yes. You'd be crazy to do that today, but it was a different time. And so to that person's point, this is where I think the big action is. It's like making a movie, but you're in charge of the movie instead of just the cinematography or just the locations or something,
Yeah.
Just keep your eye on the prize.
So we just have two more. Adrienne asks, did you have any input back in the 70s and 80s with any animated treatments of the logo type?
Animation of is this back to NASA, or is this for anything?
It's back to NASA.
I did not quite a lot. I did a number of television and film animations for NASA. They didn't end up in the manual. I think I'm most proud of those almost. Of a lot of the products, those were some of the nicest. And they won awards, and they're very pretty, beautiful things. In fact, I did what we believe was the first computer animation in New York, where we did several opening titles for NASA would benefit from public service TV. They didn't buy time on television, but they were given time from time to time just for the public good. Because it always, it was like 11:45 at night or 2 in the morning. So it wasn't prime time, okay, but anyway, so we did opening and closing things, and I do, yes, the answer is yes, and I think so. It was very progressive computer animation early on that was quite successful, and some of that stuff I'm just having converted now from its original film into digital so that we can get it into some archives. And yeah, I'm very proud of that stuff. But there wasn't much because it was, as I say, we were just kind of coming out of a sort of a cave. And, that much more wide open now, especially with the web. I mean,
Yeah.
you start there almost. Yeah.
And then Sean says, aside from the change in tools and process over time, is there anything in your current workflow that you would have approached those projects differently if you were doing them today?
As I say, in an almost totally changed universe, where it's hard to recognize. I pride myself on trying to stay current, but I don't recognize a lot of the stuff. One of the reasons that have loved these little trips with you has been that, you try to bridge that world, of important stuff and what it was into the UX world, to influence one another and to actually to work together rather than separately.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten kind of hooked on that too. And I have to tell you that after that 2017, I think it was, Clarity, the audiences got younger and younger, and more and more UX focused.
Mm-hmm.
I have to kind of get with it and try to understand. But what's neat about it is that these individuals, consumers, if you will, colleagues, are so interested in what I was doing, what we were doing, and we're trying to learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, there won't be a future unless these two things fuse. And and you've got some common objectives there, because you can't work independently and expect to do great things. One of the things that I felt in that conference, which was a very joyful experience coming from the audience, the comments and everything that I still hold dear, was how it touched them.
Mm-hmm.
And that gave me hope. So I wrote a thing for AIGA a few years ago in a series called Centennial Voices, in which I said that we were in a very awkward time. And my point was that we could see ahead, but we couldn't get there yet. I mean, we hadn't made the transition from the kind of the golden age of design into the UX world, and with a lot of influence on one another. And I think now, and I said, so I'm an optimist, and I think it'll all work out, but it's going to be decades.
Yeah.
What's going to happen in the next 3 weeks. So it is starting to come around, and that's when we can all be proud of what comes of it. So I really enjoy this role of trying to connect with it, and I think that I was set back by illness for quite a while until we had a really nice lecture circuit coming up. I don't think I'll get back to that fully, but that's what it was focused on.
Mm-hmm.
Is how to bridge these worlds and get to a point where everybody's happy with what they're doing. It's not just enough to be well paid, and because I know that a lot of people in the other world, it deals with the future. And so you're going to be well paid, but you need to be satisfied and content and feel like you're really contributing. Well, that was never a problem in our world, my world,
Yeah.
there was so much satisfaction and payoff in that sense. And so we're trying to influence one another now,
Mm-hmm.
and join hands so that we can move forward and create stuff that isn't just gone in 8 seconds, but really has some permanence. And I live and die by that timeless design. And I think that a lot of young people want that too, to feel like it isn't just so ephemeral. It's just a little burst and it's gone in 8 seconds. So we'll get there. It's going to take a while longer. It won't be after my time, but it's fun, and that connection it's helped revitalize my own view of things. As I say, some of my best friends became so jaded, and they just dumped out. But
Yeah.
we're still we're still hanging in and try to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting still, and that's important.
Yeah. That was an amazing way to kind of wrap all this up. My last question for you is, do you have anything coming up that we can look out for as well as ways that the community can support you?
Well, I'll be the first to let you know. And you know, there's one thing I can't talk about, but I would say that in general, there will be some action. I have to pace myself a little bit, which I never had to do before. But we'll keep you posted, in the loop, and you know, I hope so. And I think it's really unfortunate, because we were doing pretty well, all of us, that you know, the virus has just created a paralysis across the board for our planet, not just the United States or our profession. But you know, we'll just have to claw our way back and do that. But I'll be in touch.
Well, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, and thank you everyone that joined the call. This has been an awesome session. Thank you.
Thank you, Jina, and we'll see you. I will visit soon, I hope.
Yes, I hope so too.
Okay, onward.
Bye.
Bye.